Hello. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who came on time, thank you for doing so. And BIC has a reputation of kicking things off on time, and I'm sure others will saunter in as we start. For those of you who might be coming to, anybody who's here at BIC for the first time? Oh, there are about 5-6 people. Okay. So very briefly, BIC is a non-profit institution, a public purpose institution. It's a platform for informed conversation, arts and culture. We do about 25 odd events a month, and all our events are free to attend. The other thing about BIC is we do a lot of programs which are collaborative in nature. In fact, 1/3 of the programs that we put together are with other partners. So today, for instance, I see Abhishek Podar here. So we collaborate a lot with the Museum of Art and Photography. This time we have an occasion to collaborate with RMZ Foundation for their annual talk series. And the inaugural talk series at BIC of the RMZ Foundation Arts Talks is by Shanthamani Muddaiah. And thank you so much, Shanthamani, for doing this. So I will now call Amrita of the RMZ Foundation to give you some context about what RMZ Foundation does in the art space, as well as to introduce our speaker for the evening, Shanthamani. Amrita, please come. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So RMZ Foundation actually is a young foundation. It started around 2017 when we brought our first art sculptures in. The whole idea of doing this was the vision of the trustees to look at how art can have an impact in the long term on people's lives. And the foundation itself works on 3 verticals, which is art, sustainability, and innovation. And with regards to art, we spend a large part of our time and our efforts in bringing art directly to the people. Having said that, we've got about 45 plus monumental art sculptures, which we have across 4 cities right now, which are public art spaces, and all people are welcome there. We are creating more to go forward. But with that, we also do collaborations. We are looking at doing events and outreach, which can influence and be with the people as they go through life. Now, the reason to do this talk actually came about because we realized engagement with the public is sometimes, art seems to sometimes be very exclusive. But exclusivity does not mean that it doesn't reach out to people. And that is why we decided that we wanted to start an artist talk series, and with an artist who's as serious and as communicative and as prolific as Shanthamani is. So I want to introduce today Shanthamani Muddaiah. She's a contemporary installation and sculptural artist. I will not take too much time because she's going to take you through her life journey, her works, etc. But she has been known all across the world for her works, which include a sensitivity towards ecology, looking at material and form, which informs the way we look at the way we are looking at environments, we are looking at the spaces we live in. So Shanthamani's education, she studied at Kawa, Mysore, and also the MSU University Baroda. She's had solo exhibitions across the world. She has been awarded. She's had multiple workshops and tours. And now she's had a practice of, Shanthamani, how many years would it be now? Sorry? 30 years. So that's a lot of work for you guys to see and actually experience with her. And without further ado, I'd like to invite Shanthamani Muddaiah to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being here. I thank RMZ for giving me this opportunity to showcase my work. And thanks BIC. They are doing wonderful work, and the amount of events that they do, it's in fact is difficult to catch up sometimes, So thank you BIC for giving this venue for this program. Abhishek, thank you for being here. It is an honor to have you when I am actually doing my slideshow. And thank you, friends. Basically, I'm going to do my slide presentation, basically from the time that I started working. Just after my post-graduation, and it was a very interesting time to be in Bangalore, because Bangalore was gearing up to become an IT city, and that urgency was palpable at this particular point. And basically from Mysore, born and brought up in Mysore. I did my graduation from Mysore. I'm part of an agrarian community, so at least in 80s. Girl child's education was not such an important issue in that community. So educating myself was not only just pursuing the degrees, but it was also about really understanding what it means to educate oneself and what is my role and how do I actually play that. So that was very important. Art education gave me that space to contemplate and to really reflect on these aspects. That is when my work started. A lot of things that I share here is very personal. There are two reasons for it. That is, one is that personal experiences and art expressions are intertwined and they cannot be separated. Second one is, generally the community, in India, we believe art is a luxurious, free time activity. It is something that you do it for pleasure. Even the community, which is changing at this point, may look at the aspect a little more seriously, but the very aspect that art material has luxury taxes, that itself says that these poor artists who buy art material, they actually pay luxury taxes to have their own personal expressions in the most difficult way they live. For me, this journey, what I'm sharing is about how the art gave me space to find my identity and how I started relating to the community and the issues around me. From my early practices, I knew that I was located right in the middle of space that is in India, that even a smaller city is very multilingual and it's multicultural. Every community has its own belief system, practices, rituals. Therefore, you kind of navigate between many truths and many kinds of belief system. It's a very complex identity that we have, and within that kind of a complexity, finding who I am and what is my role as a culture practitioner is something that was a very interesting and challenging. So I literally had to put myself into these kind of new spaces to test my own belief and prejudices to see how actually I can go beyond that to find my identity. That is something that I was very interested at from the very beginning. The early art school, that's probably my first sketches in '83 when I joined art school. So it's not only, it's called self-portraits. Both of them are called self-portraits. It's not only just learning the skills of making art, but it is also about expressing what I feel and how I feel was very important. That I often made my self-portrait like a goat which has a noose around. I felt that way in the community, that I felt that what I want to say I had no space. So this is the last one from my Mysore time, so that is doing my graduation there. It is called Flying Away from Mysore. For me here, it was, the kind of material that we used in art was a very, very alien material for me. Even the oil color, the way you have to draw or learn the process was a very alien. Even before coming to art school, I hadn't even seen the watercolor or oil color tube, and I didn't even know how to open it and mix the color, and that's the way I actually landed there. And for me, learning this was not that easy, and I was not a very skilled student at that particular time. So I was looking at images of expressionist painters, just expressionism that is very much part of the time of post Second World War, the kind of trauma and the life that German artists shared was very interesting and for me to look at. And I adopted certain artist skills that was there, that, you know, the bold line that Max Beckmann was using to fill in the colors is something that I adopted then. Probably it was easy for me to work that way. And I was always charged with this point of wanting to say something more than the skill of making the work. So this is something that accrued my soul landscape, and I'm desperately wanting to fly away or move away from there. Going to Baroda was very interesting for me because till then my work was very autobiographical. I was reflecting on my personal feelings and who I am and what I should do. But landing in Baroda was very interesting because if you know, Gujarat still do free women education. So you see a lot of women who are educated, even, you know, in 10 people whom you meet, at least 3 or 4 were pursuing, you know, their PhD. So it's something, it's very interesting to see women who were very confident, who were very articulate, and who were actually commanding their space was very fascinating for me. So this process of doing drawings and painting there was just trying to locate myself in that kind of plurality that, you know, that was there. Coming back to Bangalore, in 93 was a process of really understanding what it means to live in an urban space, in a large urban space. So, and the human relation, that I was really interested in looking at how each one, you know, behaves in a public space and how they acknowledge the other human being. So and also the other fascinating element was for me is the urban growth. The urban growth was something which is, and then the man-made object that is becoming very, you know, large and evident everywhere was very important to look at. And I was fascinated with this kind of man-made tools and objects that were around. Along with that, the process for me was that I felt that I really needed to make meaning of what I do. And I felt that I really didn't learn much in art school. I really had to unlearn that to figure out the way I want to paint in further. I landed up looking at, I'm from Baroda, so figuration was very much part of my, you know, education and learning. I really wanted to undo everything that I learned at that particular time. And so I adopted to actually make paintings where you you live human presence without actually making human forms in the painting. So I started working with objects, man-made objects, and the manipulation and all of that. But then I also adopted to use red oxide primer and other material that were available for me. So it is important process here for me is how do these material that is that is industrial material, and then which is kind of have a neutrality and doesn't have a kind of expression to it, to bring that and translate it to become something like a medium to express. So that process was very important for me to understand. I started working with this, and the extension of that is actually confronting or landing up in Bangalore to experience shipbreaking yard, where there was a ship that was stuck and they were breaking it down there. And for me, looking at these parts of ships and experiencing this large scale was it sort of turned a very different kind of reality for me. Even a nut and a bolt that is actually need few people to drag it back to the shore. And that is when this experience of working, I was not only working on confronting this, I was working with paper and red oxide and pulp and all of that, and also relating to the human size when you stand in front of painting, that you also, it is also to your proportions. So this is what I wanted to do with this work. But for me, what struck me with this experience was that my time was not about human achievements. My time was about how these objects that we made had come back completely broken and needed to be kind of sorted out, and needed to be handled without really causing much of damage to environment. These are the objects that had their own story of their voyage, They are dented, they are, you know, greasy, and they are right there in front of you, and it is a problem. And that is what I realized, that my aesthetics and my time is not about that kind of refinement and then celebrating human, you know, exploration, but it is about really solving certain problems that is already, you know, mounting around us. So these are the works that I did. I abandoned brush, I abandoned the kind of skills and medium that was there. I worked with paper pulp that traditionally, you know, in villages you use newspaper with fenugreek, and then you coat the bamboo, you know, and cane objects to preserve it. And I adopted that. I mixed the colors directly into the pulp, and I kind of molded it. It's almost like sculpture, semi-sculptural. I started working with hand and hand marks and these color dripping, and this is the way that I felt that I needed to explore and find my language within this particular space. After a few years, it was also, I was looking at the city which is growing beyond its capacity. And it was also a time of a childbirth, so I was looking at how the body kind of expands and fills itself beyond its capacity, and then kind of shrinks back sometimes, and then there is stretch mark, and then the way the body gets filled up, the city gets filled up. That is something that I was looking at in this particular work. Here the fragmented body parts and elements started coming back. I think I'm also very, very much tuned to things that are, I read about scientific innovations and things like that, and I look at those technology, and I'm fascinated with that. I'm fascinated with the way these technology looks at human body. For me, human body never left my concerns and way of working. So this is a time of MRI and gamma imaging and these kind of medical technology being introduced into our hospitals. I spent a week in a MRI center looking at how the body was kind of virtually traveled through, and I adopted that as a language into my work. And here I made a work, instead of having all these work constantly on the wall where you actually look at it, I thought I will invite people to walk through my artwork, and I wanted to see what happens to, it's a process, it was not a planned work, it's a process of really literally every day understanding what do I conversate with a viewer when I invite somebody to walk through me. So it's something that I went through as a process. I made these handmade papers, large-scale handmade papers, and cut them into forms that you usually see in MRI scanning. And what I brought in was the different kinds of perceptions of female body, the way the medical technology looks at a female body, the way religion looks at it, the way fashion industry looks at it, and all of that I sort of brought in. So there are aspect of covering, there are aspect of revealing, there are aspect of designing the body, there are aspect of how some cultures are using female body as a cultural dump yard. So this is something that I was trying to do that in this entire installation. It's a 19 feet long walk in between these two layers of body, and it's painted both sides, and it's just painted with watercolor. And at the end there was this kind of 5-page open book like human body, which was on the wall. So there's a kind of a readability to it. Some of the details of the work. And I'm often interested in seeing how I can make certain kind of statements in installation, and then convert that into a kind of a flat surface and see what really happens. I do experiment, and I do try to say the same thing sometime with different material. I found these leather skin, goat skin in the fashion market, where you see this is how it comes to the fashion industry. The hind leg, and then when you open the front leg, then it looks like a female torso. And I adopted all the elements and material that you used in fashion industry to make a statement and to make a painterly an effort. So you bring in rivets and threads and bolts and staining and things like that to talk about body into this. This is a work which talks about how a body is completely pregnated, or body as a target, and a body which we measure with foot, somebody's foot, the vertical and the horizontal, of the space is measured by human 1 foot, and that is something that fascinated me, and I was working with this. So till now I was doing something that I knew how to do it in the traditional form, and then things that is randomly that I found in the market and around me. I really wanted to understand what paper means and what are its strengths, how do one work with it. So I got an opportunity to go to Glasgow to learn paper making under an artist. So it was a very important kind of learning for me, because till that particular point I was looking at paper as a flat surface, but paper as a pulp becomes three-dimensional, and it's very interesting that you can turn that into whatever you want. It can have its own volume and it can become three-dimensional. I started working with body cast in paper after that. The experience of being first time away from India is very fascinating, because I felt that a lot of people come up to you and say things, and the way your body is and the skin color and the way you talk, people assume where you come from, and whatever they think where you come from, that is what they think that they understand about you. So some people will say, Paki, go home, or somebody will say, you're from Bangalore, you took away my job, or somebody says Goa is great. It has nothing to do with me, but somebody else is actually designing and making these decisions behalf of me, and it's very interesting to see who made this and why am I actually holding. But at the same time, I also felt a tremendous freedom to kind of own the history of this geography. So I started working with body cast. On my body there are certain kinds of imprint. It's also, the time that I left, where this kind of IT booming in Bangalore, and then this incredible India, this VR in the global map, all of this is happening. The minute you shift the space, you realize where you actually stand in this kind of global market, and the way, international space looks at a particular kind of cultures or economy or things like that, and it is a fascinating experience for me. So I started working with the body, with my own body cast, and then painting it. So I clubbed this, patented and outsourced as part of the whole issue. It's not only somebody who took away somebody's job out there, but there is also somebody who's taking away my land to create a Swiss rose here, and still branded as Swiss rose despite of it's grown here. I also, the other drawing, the body cast that you see is the one side you see a miniature outline of Akbar crossing Ganges, and the bottom is from Darya Dawlat Palace, from Tipu Sultan's palace, where you have Britishers marching, and there's a gear wheel in the middle which says I'm part of evolution and revolution. So I started playing with this history and things on my own body, because no matter whether I want it or not, my body is communicating in such an international space. So I started owning that history, and I started working with that. Body politics, made in India. So coming back, I also realized, this whole IT community, it's also a time of .coms, it's a time era of .com. It's also call centers in Bangalore. So a lot of work that I make is actually coming from the experience of living in this particular city. So for me, the hand became very interesting, because there are many people who are working invisible, probably with with a different identity in these call centers and IT spaces. These are working, and they are outsourced for something, and they are outsourcing the others to be their taxi drivers or the cooks, or it's very interesting the way it sort of works. And then the city was becoming 24/7 workspace, stripping its identity of being a garden city or a pub city or a science city or a pensioner's paradise. It was becoming an IT city, and this is something there were millions of hands working invisible in this space. So I decided to actually first time after a long time paint, and acrylic is something that by this time a very settled down medium that one could use. I think also visiting museums when I was in UK and looking at masters' work in original, right in front of me, I think I understood what it means to paint. So I started working with acrylic on canvas in this particular series. I made hands, either they are working hands or they are cultural hands, and there is the background becomes very animated, and that is what actually documenting what's happening in the city. So the one which is towards your left is a hand, a working hand, which says patent and outsourced on the top, and there is a sari, silk sari, half woven, and it has got a Queen's Victoria's crown on the top as a motif. The other one is reform friendly, so you have this gesture of Bharatanatyam gesture of there, and then you have women endlessly working to build infrastructure. These all came with certain kind of discussions that you have. Some of the MNCs that you meet them, heads of MNCs, when you meet them, and they will say, oh, we are here to do something good, So when really, when you start looking at it and when you work with these kind of aspects and you realize there's a different kind of reasoning and what actually works when you land in a developing country, and what happens to cultural space and people in that particular space is something that I was fascinated by this time. This is called Argumentative Indian. The title is borrowed by Amartya Sen's book. So it talks about different things, different postures that comes from Bharatanatyam, but then you have things that are happening at that particular point in between 2006 and 8 happening around you. So you have, especially the one, the green one, I try to bring in the pixelation as a language into the painting. Then I also brought these acrobatic children that you saw first time in Bangalore, signals where they are actually performing to earn something. There are other things that you constantly see is that people working. You also have a half-plown land, a working hand, and then a traffic jam on top of it. So I try to do things, I try to layer it to kind of bring this kind of context, bring the cultural space and then the contemporary space together within the canvas. So this particular canvas says, I borrowed the title from Nina Simone, my hair is black and my skin is yellow, between two worlds. So it was a call center, and this kind of identity issues that I brought into the work. I also try to bring in this first time being in front of computer, this fascinating that there are icons there you can play with, you can compress it, you can save it, you can delete it, and then it is interesting to use that in culturally. For me, pixelation till then was mostly what you see in television where you hide somebody's identity. But pixelation is also something that is just before forming the clarity or image dissolving. So I brought that as a narration into it. This is a time of Bamiyan Buddha, the horror of seeing Bamiyan Buddha getting this, kind of blown into pieces. This remained in my head and I brought it into it, and this kind of element of playfulness that I can do whatever I want is something that I wanted to bring into the work. This is called Global Village. This canvas is around 7 feet by 16 feet. So you have these two working hands, and first time I'm seeing Google map and Google streets, that you see the real street and this thing. So the grid that you usually see before it becomes clear is what I took in to look at this kind of space as Bangalore. It sits on this garden city which has got this pulsating thing through optic fiber that is running under our feet. And these hands are constantly working, either they are working hands or the cultural gestures. So there are innumerable hands that are constantly working in this particular painting. But during this particular period, I also felt Bangalore was changing drastically, and I felt there's an urgency to document Bangalore. And I started actually every week, twice, going out onto the street with my camera, talking to people, and also photographing different streets and alleys and signboards, and talking to people what it means to be in Bangalore, which is getting so dense. How does it affect them? What is the advantage and disadvantages of being in this kind of space? I also felt that a lot of craft and traditions will be vanishing very quickly. So I started actually documenting. I have around 40,000 slides of Bangalore from between 2006 and 8, and I have few 10-15 hours of people talking about what it means to live in Bangalore. So it was interesting, and this process was not only just trying to kind of create an archive to make the work. It was also about how to understand the city, how to understand from different point of view, and whom does it belong to. At the same time, how do one make this space of their own and live inside this. Third is also about trying to kind of root my practices within it. So I did this exercise for a year or two, and then I did these montages where I actually put the photographic images together, and that talks about the skills and then the crafts that are there in city, but it also kind of builds in a different kind of a narration. So you have the girl who is selling aeroplanes, toy aeroplane in the signals. You have uprooted tree, and 2008 we lost around 48,000 trees on the side roads of Bangalore just to connect every area to airport. And you have these uprooted trees, you have these quilts, and which basically these quilts which are drying in the construction spaces, clearly indicating these are the farmers who are coming from North India to try find jobs. So there is also Tibetan community which is linked. So this kind of layering, but it also has its own story of how Bangalore is trying to make space or losing its in its tree cover for just connectivity towards the airport. So each of these photographs had its own kind of a story and narration. So the old and the new. So first time, I've been living here from 93 onwards. I have few friends who are in the IT, some of them are here. So I have few friends who are in the IT sector, and probably they are the ones, or one generation before, the first ones who went into their graduation and post-graduation in technology and computer science, and they were the ones. Suddenly I started hearing being exhausted or burnt out, and it is very interesting. For me as an artist, I couldn't imagine what it means for a human being to be burnt out. And suddenly this garden city, laid back space, and where you are practicing, that sort of stuck in my head for a very long time, what it means to be burnt out. And this is also the time where I was listening to a lot of podcasts about environmental issues and the carbon increasing in the urban spaces, and that impact onto people and ways of living. And I was trying to look for a material that actually can become a metaphor for that particular time that we lived in, and that's the time where we felt we are stuck in this city. For me, applying these small pieces of charcoal, into paper mold, they became a very interesting composite that can actually become, work in terms of volume. And I started working with charcoal from that point of time. The charcoal, which represents for me the issues of carbon, was something that is very, wood charcoal was readily available in the city. It's interesting for me because it's fragmented. It reminds you of a tree that it was once before. And it's also something that is going to become, which is very easily going to become, ash very soon. So it's in between, stage. Charcoal is in between the ash and the tree. And for me, that fragments putting together is a kind of an attitude where you want to really bring these fragments together to make forms, to talk about what is happening today. So it became a kind of a medium and a metaphor to talk about this city and what is happening here. This is a cloud. it's 3 feet by 3.5 feet, cloud, housed in 8 feet by 8 feet, kind of squarish room. And it's got a sound of monsoon coming, and you also have a white paper at the bottom, whereas you walk around it, you also leave your footprint, the black footprint that you leave at the bottom. For me, it is what I was looking at in these images was how human beings are actually manipulating things even before it's manifest. So that is something that is, genetic engineering is something that is very much at that point in debate. And I was looking at these aspects to communicate that, and I worked on these kind of images. It was also about testing this paper and charcoal as a material, how much I can expand it and how much I can push its boundaries to become. How large can I go? How much can I work with? What are the things that I can push to create certain kind of forms and to make them expressive is something that I was working with. My works are very layered. They can be approached in different levels. Yes, you can look at it. I call it home. It can be about female issues and the way women are not even safe within their home. It is also more than that for me. It is about the birth, and it is also the birth that is already been kind of manipulated or burnt out. So it talks about the death and the birth together, and these are the kind of things that I was kind of trying to find in these forms. 2010, I was invited to show in Miami, my solo show, and I really didn't want it to go there as just an Indian artist who was going to talk about issues of India, because I felt by this time when I was working with charcoal, I felt that we outsourced a lot of things far away from where we are. We made production somewhere else. We removed the hardship and then the pollution to some other shores. But when the environment affected to everyone. So it was no matter where we were, we had to deal with it. And I wanted to really talk about those aspects with familiar forms that can be part of this show. Therefore, I felt that no matter which region I come from or which space I exhibit, there is a kind of a commonality that I can actually work with. So I started bringing mythical forms into especially in this show, I brought in mythical forms into the show, and so that there is a kind of familiarity no matter where I show it. So this is Icarus and also Jatayu. So this kind of extreme meanings are there within the work. It's around 6 feet tall. Mother goddesses, it's an image before, it's very much there in the Ephesus, it's called Lady of Ephesus. This particular form is there from Egyptian time. It's pre-Greek and also probably Islam, So this talking about nature and abundance is something that I wanted to bring in through this particular form. And this is hand. It's around 5 feet by 3.5 feet. So it is, as I work, the paper and charcoal and the volume is expanding, and I'm actually testing to see how it works. It is also about, these hands reference come from Sistine Chapel, where both hand of God and Adam kind of get burnt and falls down. This is the way I looked at the way East and West connected. The spark, the way we connected through technology is through those sparks and then those kind of things. So I was looking at how these two hands get burnt and falls down to the floor, completely ruptured and and mortal, with this kind of issue that is existing around with the global warming. I also made a $100 bill for this particular show. 2010 is just after the meltdown of economy, and I wanted to talk about fragility of money. And these are the images that I went with for Miami show. Body, the expansion, and upside down tree. So by this time I'm really interested in carbon. For me, probably the reason that I go into material is about not necessarily creating my opinion by just things that are available or information that is available out there through media, but it is really about exploring that very material and trying to understand what it is and how is that affecting us, and what are its positivity, and what is the positive thing within that, and what is the negative aspect to it, and why is it that it becomes so acidic, is something that I want to really understand within my own process. Therefore it is important for me to confront the material. So for me, the interesting aspect of working with this is I have used all kinds of carbon material. I've used I've used graphite, I've used bamboo charcoal, I've used petroleum products and things like that to work. For me, the understanding within this process is that even the carbon is also not only the one which is polluting, which is also the carbon is also the one which filters. The filtration which we are using for water and air purification is also carbon. That's the interesting part for me. So I was invited to do a show called, a curated show called Beast and the Beauty, and I was invited to make a work, and I decided to actually explore the beastiness of the beauty, or the rage of the beauty, and what happens. And then I took two elements. One is Kali and the rage of Kali, and then the rage of Medusa in this particular show. And for me, this exercise was very interesting and important, because different cultures expresses different ways. The Kali's rage is by premeditated way of just an act of putting her tongue out, is expressing her rage and then the injustice around her. And whereas the Medusa that comes from a different culture, where the rage is expressed through her hair, which is becoming a snake, and there is a kind of a movement, and both have that kind of sexuality as element. But it's very interesting how different cultures actually uses different methods to express. And this was very important for me to go through this exercise. Sometimes when people call me to be part of the curation, this is one advantage of something that you don't probably do it, is that you confront it and you learn it, and that is very interesting process for me. This is subliminal metropolis. Pillar is a very important element in the growth, urban growth. You see it everywhere. And the reality is, as the urban landscape, urban skyline, as it increases, you also go down deep into the earth for resources to sustain such a growth. So I created this space where the pillars are inverted. It's also that you confront, if you go into mining, you confront these pillars. Basically, these pillars are witness pillars to kind of measure how deep you are going into the earth. So I created these, I suspended these pillars, and as you walk into this wooden paneled room, you create certain vibration where the pillar starts moving. So it creates a kind of very unstable spaces, and then that is the work that I did for this particular curation. This is graphite. It's a very small work that I've done. This is graphite. It's apple and the graphite which you draw. Graphite is also the petroleum and carbon product is something that has fueled all our desires, our imagination, and it sustained us. It's also depleting, and I really wanted to use methods that are closer to the graphite to talk about it. There is an apple that is that temptation is inevitable, which we call growth and which we call development. And there is also this that which you rub on as you write, it is also depleting, and it is something that I really wanted to bring into that work. I also looked into another natural element, and to see what happens. I happen to be part of a 3 women artist group which did a journey of Ganga from the beginning to end. So we kind of the upper Ganga, we did the trekking, and from Allahabad all the way to Ganga Sagar, we took a boat, and we really wanted to witness what the river with its flow, and then witness what happens on the bank, being part of the flow. And and I have made work around, I've made work every day as we anchored and we talked to people, and I've made work. I was very conscious not to bring in any kind of artificial material to make work within the site. I used fire, camphor, ash and flower to make work and talk about the issues of Ganga and what is happening to it at this point of time. So I made my people live things in Ganges and then they let go and they watch it go, and as an offering. I made my own body in flower and camphor and ash, and then let go, and I followed it in boat to see how it sort of dissolves it with its current. So I did work, and then I also documented the banks of Ganga and what is happening around it. So it's a different kind of an understanding of a natural resource and what happens to it. It is also an understanding why people kind of create so many layers of rituals around it, what makes them believe it in such a level. These are the things that was interesting for me to understand. So in this particular, after this process that I actually made, I really felt Ganga is a backbone of our culture. It sustains 5 states of India in terms of agriculture and drinking water. It is also a main source of transportation, and I wanted to make that backbone with charcoal to bring in contemporary issues around it. This particular one is around 34 feet. So throughout the journey in Ganga, you constantly see the cities that you see on the banks also reflecting into it. So somehow the city and its reflection becomes one entity, and that remained in my head for a long time. And this is the work that I call it fire script. I have experimented with bamboo. Bamboo is a very interesting material. Bamboo charcoal is associated with purification part. Bamboo is at the moment it's looked at as a very important element because it's one of the fastest growing grass. It grows into a timber within 4 years, and very strong. Its tensile strength is very high. It can burn to very high temperature because of its silica, and therefore they use it for all the filtration. It is also something that is looked very much with great interest today in other parts of the world, is because of the ethanol that you can extract, 92% pure ethanol that you can extract out of it. So therefore there are departments that are actually exploring bamboo for lifestyle options and also for the biofuel. This is a work I made during my residency in Cité Design in France. It's called Believer. The Believer is structured in bamboo, and then you have this fastest growing plant within that. We're growing into it, and to retain this readability of this Believer, you constantly have to trim that growth. And that is what actually is intended in that. Bangalore, the greenery is shrinking drastically. The landscape is kind of evaporating and it's flying away. For me, this experience is about looking at the migratory birds that are there during April in Bangalore. And this is the time where Bangalore, the grass burns out because of the heat. So you have fire and you have a black landscape, and as you grow closer to these kind of spaces, you see something moving and shimmering, and they fly away. These small migratory black birds, they fly away. Their underbelly is very white, and they kind of merge into the sky. So it's very poetic the way they the land shifts out into the sky. And then I made this work as flying landscape from that particular experience. Bamboo is looked as a very rigid material. Apart from the weaving, which is the very thin, bamboo fibers, it is very rigid, and you believe we believe it can be worked with horizontal and verticals. I really wanted to push to see how much I can bend it and work with it. It's a visualization of a black ink falling down to the ground, But my influences here was the Belur Halebi temple. The amount of ornamentation that you see within the sculpture is very interesting. The basic principles of these decorative element is the S curve. So I brought that into this particular work, and I really try to bend the bamboo to see whether I can achieve it. This is the wave. I am very much aware of the wave, of Hakusai. That is, my intention is not to imitate him, but for me, what I was visualizing is the gallery floor that lifts up and kind of consumes you. That is what I wanted to actually bring in here. But it's also a carbon wave. It's a burnt charcoal, and it's a carbon wave that is hovering around us. By this time, interestingly, I was invited to do some of my work in a large scale, and have one slide which is slightly away from that. This is a work that I did for in a Yorkshire storytelling community. Basically, I was mapping Yorkshire, a small town in Yorkshire, where I had devised a method to sit with people, to work, to listen to them. So to make them settle down into a space, I decided to do their hand casting. So they sit down with me holding their hand till I finish the casting. So they're talking about their experience or their skills and what it means to live in that particular space, and the history of that particular space. So around 30 the people I interviewed in this method, and I have their hand cast and their videos where they're speaking about that particular kind of, cultures and histories. And that is the way I kind of engaged the community, and they became part of the artwork. And the festivity around it was also not only they seeing themselves, it is also about the larger the larger intentions of people. By and large, you really care for the community, and you really work towards betterment of it. So it's interesting to see how people react when you put a camera in front of them, and this is a work that I did for that. And some of the work, when I was invited to a large festivals and then commissioned to work the work that I had done before in a smaller scale, was interesting. I was invited to be part of the Kochi Mozris Biennial. It was an outdoor, and then I decided to make that backbone, feeling that it was relevant to the curatorial note of Jitish Kalat, and it is around 72 feet long. I used in the ash, that is the it is the residue of coal, that is what is left out with cement, and I created this work for an outdoor. I was invited by RMZ to do a stone. I was a part of the stone symposium there. It is interesting. I was first time working with this material. It's interesting to see how stone works. The kind of things that you believe what it is actually breaks down. It's very interesting. It's malleable, it's workable. But to create a scale of this kind and look at your work in that, this thing is very interesting. And it's possible only because there is that infrastructure that is kind of created around it to make it work. I had a group of carvers as a support structure system there. Then you need a crane, and all of that was there to make it work. And in that sense, what RMZ is doing is very interesting, and it's important for artists to scaling up to this kind of level. Here it is black marble, and I worked with the grains and then the entire roughness to the smooth aspect of it. It's around, I think, 8 tons at this point after carving. For me, I am interested in the public art and putting my work in public space is because unlike being in a gallery where your work has a ready meaning and people come for a particular expected way of interacting with work, public work behaves very differently. There's a casualness to it. People, the way they associate with it is very different, and their body languages changes in such a space. And it also feels very democratic to put artwork there because it becomes part of people's everyday experiences. And I really want to see my work becoming part of that narration where somebody talk about a work that they saw on a daily basis and what it means to them. That is another layer that I really want to see with my work. Therefore, I'm interested in doing in public artwork. This is copper. This is in Swiss Re. So basically, till now, I was translating the work that I did in natural material and fibers into the conventional material because of it being in a public space. This is a wave. It's there in front of RMZ in Whitefield, in front of SAP Lab. So that's my journey. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I'll be very happy if you have any questions or any kind of remarks or, I will be very happy to hear it.
My question to you is, and I'm also trying to frame my question in my mind, so just pardon me if I don't get it to you like pretty straightforward, cut straight. So,
please let me.
My question is that when I'm looking at your work, I'm also seeing the traces of how what's happening around you in cities, whether it's in India, whether it's in what's happening in Bangalore, how the city is changing, how the landscape is evolving, has constantly pushed you to think about your art and how your art as a practice has evolved. I think I'm just trying to understand as to how important for you it is as an artist to think about as to what's happening around you and what's your own commentary about it is all about. If you don't even think about some of it, and if you just kind of practice your art in a little bit of an isolation, just not get impacted by it so much, would your art practice be any different? Would your aesthetic essence of what you want to say and express will be very different?
Yeah, true. That is true. It can be very different if you don't react to it. But for me, I'm from the very beginning, I think I'm very conscious not only about trying to figure out who I am and what is my role. I think I also feel that I am responsible in certain levels to articulate this particular time. As an artist, practicing artist, I feel that I need to articulate the time that I live in, and I need to kind of register that in my work. It's also not about this kind of luxury of I and myself and I am gifted or whatever. It's about really using this medium as a medium of communication. And therefore, because I also felt when I came to Bangalore in '93, there was nothing here apart from Venkatappa Gallery, and I think there was no gallery. Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, for a lot of contemporary artists, it's not that easy for us to kind of get into things. There's hardly any kind of commerce around the art. And then Bangalore also behaved like it is okay to not to have contemporary practitioners, especially visual artists here. It pretended very few were there, and it was okay. That kind of vibrant culture was not there. Apart from, the dance and the classical music, you really didn't see much. So we were all stuck in our own small, living spaces, trying to do odd jobs in the daytime and try to paint in the evening. Somehow I wanted to shout out and say, I'm here and I have a role to play and I can do something that is significant within the community. So therefore, it was very important for me to find a way of being useful. I don't know, being somebody who can actually play that role of creating images that can lend itself to express what it is at this particular time that we are going through. So that was important for me, yeah. Hi.
So initially you were talking about how you were making things with your hands with the fenugreek and the handmade paper. So I was wondering, when you scale up your works, you do need a team to work with you.
Yeah.
It's not just your own hands that are making the art anymore. So how does that work for you in that? Because you're no longer just you who's making it with your own hands, but you need an entire sort of collective to do that work with you and almost for you sometimes?
Yeah, I know this question is something that really one, as an practicing artist, needs to sort of address it. As it scales up, yes, it is something that is beyond your means and capabilities to make an impact in that scale. Having a collective team and to get them to do what you really want, not necessarily in terms of expression or fine-tuning the kind of idea that you have and to work with, because I work with many maquettes and scaled drawings and things like that. So I draw a lot along with the three-dimensional sculptures and installation. I constantly draw because I'm not trained as a sculptor and I'm a painter and I think still like a painter. So I draw to teach myself how to make it. I also draw to see different dimensions to see how it works. I also had to plan out how different people who come in to work with me can kind of adopt certain things, and what actually is mine, which is purely that I have to work with, that I have to completely plan. But it's also very interesting to see in that kind of a scale. The scale has a different impact altogether. Working in a small studios on a space where you only can actually manage has a different kind of emotion and charged and a space, but going into large scale has a different kind of impact, and the way it emotes is completely different. I have no problem with being part of that collective and acknowledging the collective that contributes into the work. Yes, it is important when you work in that stage to accept, democratically accept their viewpoints and the things that they bring in. Sometimes can be very challenging. Sometimes you spend a lot of time just arguing, trying to convince them, but that is part of it. It is not about controlling them. It is about trying to get them into the same page as you are to make it work. But it has an advantage, different kind of an advantage to work with that scale. Yeah.
I work with Amrita and your colleagues, and when Amrita was having all the art pieces installed in our spaces, there was one piece which really caught my attention, and even when I came in today, I didn't know that it was your work, because at that point of time the name didn't register me, and even when I came today, the name it was just, but the art piece was always in my mind. It's those granite hands.
Yeah.
All right, and whenever I saw it, I had this one question in my mind that I will definitely. I just want to know what was running in your mind at that point of time when you were doing that particular piece, because I always told Amrita that this is the best piece ever. I mean, it really touched me, and she knows that. And there's a little bit of history we have around it, but my question to you is that when you were doing that particular piece, what was in your mind? Because what I felt would be different from maybe what you were going through. I found it very strong. I found the hands and the fingers and the fingernails to be very, very appealing. But I'd like to know from you, what was in your mind, or what brought you to carve that?
Yeah. So for me, I've been making this kind of working hands for a very long time. I think almost 10-15 years I've been actually working with hands. And either I casted it, I've done drawings of it, I've painted it, and I've always been fascinated with that working hand. So I decided to actually make that hand in RMZ because these are the invisible hands that are working behind those, cement blocks. And then I knew there are thousands of them. And when we were doing the workshop there, I knew there are some 70,000 people, techies are working, and their hands are working there. There's so many hands, and I really wanted to kind of create a tribute there. That's why I proposed that particular hand for that. When I came to the workshop, looking at this block, which was 16 tons, and even the crane couldn't lift it, And I had never carved before. It was overwhelming. In fact, I was thinking whether I should run away from there. So, but I had prepared myself to confront it in the sense that I had made a small scale model, and it was absolutely to the, to the inches and centimeters level where I could measure it, and I constantly measured both and then did the drawing to get it right. It was a month. I had around 6 people from Rajasthan who are actually familiar with carving. I also learned a bit of a carving with them. The entire month was very interesting because I'm not a sculptor, so I don't understand what it means to deal with a volume like that. For me, I have this vision. I want to make hands, and I'm going to cut it across and trim it. But all the sculptors told me is that Michelangelo said, work with the material, work around the stone. You're not actually, break it down to such a thing. So they were all finishing end of first week and second week, and I'm still breaking main chunks to create that form. I've not seen the form yet. And the entire team said, you're in trouble. There is no way you can finish this in 1 month. And they also said, you don't know what you got into. What if you get some kind of a cavity or a crack in it? If the stones. So I had no understanding of stone. I had landed there and I decided I'm going to work with this. The only guys were assuring was these carvers from Rajasthan, don't worry, madam, we will do it, don't worry. So I had no clue. So I had sleepless night for first 2 weeks. In fact, I would wake up a few of my colleagues in the night in the hotel. We were staying right next to the RMZ in that hotel. And then I would wake up them and say, if you want to tell me something or if you want to, kind of scold me, do it now, because I really need to understand what is wrong in it. So it was a different challenge. And I guess when you make large work, those challenges are inevitable. And I've got used to it now. So
It fits perfectly well in the space.
thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Shanthamani, I am familiar with your works and a lot of many other artists. This is one question I have and I've been thinking about for a long time with regards to the way the future of art is happening. And you look at a lot of bombarding of digital AI. It has its advantages. But for people who've worked in traditional mediums, have looked at things with reality as their primary set of experiences, how would you negotiate something like this in the future? Are you doing something about it? Does it influence you in some way? Is it changing the way your work is seen and how you see it?
I have no problem with AI or digital technology or kind of NIFT or whatever it is. I have no problem with any kind of new things coming into art. In fact, it's not that they are coming into art. Artists are embracing quickly anything that is that is very new. And when you look back to history, the mankind has always gone with something that is new, and they have experimented. That's how we have grown up, or we're here because of that. Do I get to use it? Probably I will definitely explore it. Do I make it my own and work with? I don't know at this point of time. But for me, I have a very strong belief of doing things with my hand, and I have a particular reason, because the way I work kind of gave me strength to stand up on a podium like this anywhere and to say what I want to say. So art has given me that kind of strength to talk about who I am or what I really think and what my belief systems are. So physicality is something that is very important for me, and that's how actually I register my very physical presence. Therefore, I would opt to do things physical. That doesn't mean that I don't explore those aspects. There are some amazing work that has happened in tech-based work, and I'm fascinated with that. And I don't know whether that becomes my language at this point. I don't know. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
I wanted to ask, when you're representing or working with people, say the workers hands or people who come from a place different, or you come from a place different from them, how do you negotiate your position? Like, one might be that you do put in labor into the making of your work. But yeah, how do you negotiate your position? That's the first question. And also second, you said that you, like when you moved into making work in public space, also how is that received by the worker?
I think for me, luckily till now, the community that worked with me is willing to work with the given set of ideas. So I have already a very clear-cut thing that what I want to do with when somebody comes to work with. If you're working with somebody in a collaborative space, then it's a different kind of a challenge altogether. So till now, I have not done that kind of collaboration. When you actually collaborate, it's interesting, and it takes a very different kind of space, and it also results in things that you probably have not expected, but that is given when you actually collaborate. Till today, I have done collaboration work before with few artists, and I've made sculptures may not look like my work, but that's a different kind of a challenge. But the works that I showed you till now, there is already a set ideas, and then you have collective that coming together to make that work happen. So that is the base that you start negotiating with, that is accepted that this is going to be done. You know, putting work in public space. See, the kind of people you work with, they are familiar with the kind of work, with the kind of art that you make. Even the people who came to work with, for instance, people who came to carve my stone sculpture, they're also traditional carvers. They're also making installations, whether it's temple or the mythical images or kind of iconic images. They're also making and installing it in public spaces. They are very aware, probably they're more capable of seeing that public space being established with the particular image and its expression. Yeah.
Would you like to share some of your experiences of how people interacted with your work? Because I'm so thrilled to see your work. I've seen your exhibitions at Zoka and all that. But here you've kind of brought it into such a, like for me it's like a 3D experience of your work. But I'm just wondering how on a one-on-one, how did your viewers or the people who interacted with your work, because it's huge. And I'm sure it's like something very different, especially in Bangalore. How did people react, and did you find it amusing, or did you feel, maybe the viewer needs to be educated on how to see this? Because when you're explaining it to me, it's like amazing.
Making art is one aspect, but putting it out there, whether it's a gallery or a public space, is another space where the intention is to interact. The intention is to receive whatever the public is going to give it to you, and that is very important because it's a learning experience for me. There are things people tell you that you have never thought of, and that kind of take you for a different tangent. So it's very important that you experience what people say, no matter what they say. And not necessarily all the time it is some great review or appreciative, but sometimes it can be very critical, and then each one has made who I am today, and that is very important for me. Artwork being in public space means meeting people, and that platform gives you a different kind of identity, and that is so important, and I always look forward to it. The amazing aspect that I felt first time putting my work in the Kochi Mozres was it was offered to the blind school children first time, and they were experiencing, because rest of the works can be delicate and they may not be able to touch it, then this was the work that they allowed people to experience it, touch it, and being with it. And that was an important experience because these kids also talked about what that work was about, and that was a very, very important feedback that I got. And they also made this particular work into embossing in children's book. So sometimes your work goes beyond what you intend to do, and that is a departure. I like that departure because it goes beyond the artist, and it is your learning experience because it just becomes independent from you, being associated with you, and it has its own space of taking over and becoming something else. For instance, if somebody wants to hang your work upside down, what do you do? It's okay to be hung upside down. You know, you have no control on it, and that's what will happen. And it's amazing to look at it and think what make them actually do it. And for me, the big aspect of putting that work in RMZ in both places was that it taught me how a work in a public space creates a cultural layer, memories, and it becomes part of somebody's experience, day-to-day experience. And that's how you build cultural layers. It's not necessarily there is a corner and there is a mantap and there is a big Hanuman. You also have a contemporary work in that corner. When you cross, when you park your vehicle, there is that particular work, and then it has a different, distinct, different kind of meaning to lend. And there's a possibility of seeing it in your different minds, space. Each time you look at it, you look at something else, and I'm really looking forward to hear that. If somebody who gets out of that echo space or echo world and they say, oh God, I looked at it and I terrible every day I saw it, I don't have to see it anymore, I'm fine with it, and I want to see that. I want to hear those things. Yeah.
Hi, hello.
Hi.
So my question is that there is a recurring theme between your works and cultures, even whilst using ephemeral materials, natural materials, to create your works. And for decades, we have observed that there is an even while culture fades, art remains. So would you say that what you're creating is you're creating it for to be part of a historical archive? Like short-term versus long-term.
I understood. Yeah. For me, more than whether I will last long or whether I won't last long, that is not really pressing for me. What is more urgent is we really believe this culture is 3,000 years old, and there is something called very ideally, there's a culture out there, and that is what we are all. And somehow there is a space, a city like this, which is extremely experimental and which uses technology in much more than any other place, doesn't have a contemporary culture. It doesn't have something that we don't. There are people who are working with great technology, and the evening, there is, the end of the day, there is nothing that is contemporary that is articulating in terms of culture. We need to actually gear up to create that contemporary cultures that actually create that buzz and then involve communities to talk about what it means to have contemporary practicing cultures. So putting my work out there is important at this particular point of time for me, because it is about today. It is not about yesterday or 3,000 years ago. It is about today, and it's about today's issue and engaging communities with today's problems or aesthetics. That is what is very important, I feel, at this point. Yeah. Good evening.
So your art, like you said to us that you are a painter and you think as a painter. And then your art, you want it to be useful and you want it to be like an everyday experience. And you using natural resources, I feel is like, also there is this sort of connection that you're bringing forth. So in your journey of art and an artist, and to reach where you have reached today, to be standing here, I would want to know what took you to start.
My intention of wanting to be useful probably is not there in the beginning, but wanting to be somebody of my own kind who has our own freedom and to think independently without any barriers or constraints is something that was the beginning. To make myself was the beginning. But when you make yourself, what do you associate with? What do you do with yourself? And how do you relate to your surrounding? And what do you actually care, or what do you articulate becomes very important. That is where I probably kind of molded myself to who I am today. And and the great part is that creativity gives you that space to, mold yourself. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask do you think charcoal continues to be, or carbon actually, since that's where you kind of make the choice of charcoal, if carbon continues to be the material to speak about environmental issues, or if there are sorts of new things like microplastics, or I don't know.
Yeah. True. Just the other day, my son was telling me about the issues of microplastic and this thing. It is very important to really address something like that. But as an artist, for me at that particular point of time, this was a material that was available. I started using it. I kind of built it around to become a language of my own. I feel the exploration is not ended yet. There are a lot more to say within that spectrum. Somehow it gives me a space to judge or look at things that are happening around. Even for instance, when in the presidential elections, if somebody says clean energy, put the coal back, I know what it means, So it has given me that space, and I feel I have not finished yet with that particular material. There's a lot more to explore. Therefore, I'm still there. Material like plastic and issues, yes, we all are responsible for it. Will I take it up? I don't know. There is a kind of an activism within the art practice, but it is not the other way around. It is not trying to use my art to become activist, but I am trying to bring in the bring in issues within the art practice and trying to create language around it. Yeah.
So charcoal hasn't lost its relevance to...
For me, no, not yet. Yeah.
So I had another question about some of the works that you made after coming to Bangalore are really situated in the cultural movement, the point that Bangalore was, with call centers coming up, Bangalore becoming a predominantly, IT-centered city.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is not a question as much as just thought that those work sorts of really are situated in that, in that backdrop of the city's time, right? City's moment in time. And how do you think, looking back at them from today's time, which is a fair bit might have or might not have changed about the city, what's your reflection looking back at that work that was responding to that time in which it was being made, looking back?
For me, the opportunity of being in Bangalore and trying to articulate is a way of understanding. This became a kind of micro scale of what can happen to a developing country. So I really I felt that I understood what when the business module comes into a third world, what actually happens. I thought I understood that here in Bangalore. Whether call centers moved away, whether the density became different post-COVID, and all of that, the intensity of that kind of business module applied onto a community is still there. And this application, what it brings apart from the economy and what we lose out and what we gain is very much there in every third world, in fact. And in fact, my ambition at this point was probably to connect to all the other BRIC countries and see what happens. There is a common language within the artist community that actually talks about this sort of issues, which can be an alternate to the mainstream language within the art. So that is something that is very much there. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah.
So I see how you use hands and different materials to embody them and capture them, especially in movement. So why hands? What's the story behind that? And also as an artist, do you find yourself sticking to one thing, as in once you found your voice or certain medium, certain approach, do you become comfortable with it, or are you constantly challenging yourself and pushing yourself out of your comfort zone to create all of it?
Yes and no, both are there. Yes, I am very comfortable with certain things, but I have also kind of pushed some of the things that I really felt comfortable to push it also. So I have explored. I have one common thing, that is carbon and representation of carbon, but I've also gone into using graphite, using carbon fiber. I've used recently carbon fiber into work. I've used resins. I've used bamboo. I've used other kind of material. I am not going to shy away because I'm being branded as somebody who uses natural fibers and work with environmental friendly material. For me, the very important aspect is to really understand these materials that are generated out of carbon and the fascination towards its role within our life and what it has done to us. And that is my way of understanding things, and that is my way of and that's my way of coming to terms with certain things that are existing around me. Yeah.
Could you tell me more about the hands?
As I said earlier, for me, from very beginning, this negation of hide yourself, don't come in front of people or something like that from very childhood as a girl child, my physical being became very important, where I wanted to assert my presence. And my presence is very physical, and then I wanted to do something very physical, and then therefore I use materials, and I moved away from making painting to sculpture because I really wanted to assert the physicality of the material and physical possibilities that I can do physically, what I can do, and it is hands that actually works with, and yeah, somehow with all of these put together and looking at these so many techies working with their hands invisible away from the kind of natural landscape and working long hours, all of that came into my this thing. So I articulated probably all of that, and then probably there's another reason why hand kept coming back. So I've worked all my career, I've worked with working hands. Yeah.
So Shanthamani, thank you so much for today and for this. We're very happy to have had our inaugural annual session with Shanthamani today, and hopefully next year we'll come back to you with another exciting and interesting artist who's making a difference in the world we live in. But our journey is not over, nor is it over between Shanthamani and us at the foundation. And hopefully we'll be able to show you more of our works across cities and have more such interesting sessions going further. Thank you so much for coming today. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Shanthamani.
Thank you. Thank you very much.